So we've now onto the Kershaw Clonal Selection Syrah, and this is from just the Elgin region. On the back we'll display all the different vineyards, and here we're taking from about 5 or 6 different parcels, in which we have about 2 or 3 clones. Now, in this respect, clonal selection refers to the 2 clones, clone 9C and the more equally aptly named clone 22, which means absolutely nothing to anybody except for some clone head, or cone head I should say, in a laboratory. But effectively the 2 differences are that the 9C gives you that lovely florality, the elegance and lift and charm, and the 22 gives you that structure and backbone that you need for the support of the wine. And in the glass itself we will have probably about 70-75% 9 and 9C I should say, and the rest would be 22. This is from, as I mentioned, from Elgin, so we have a lot of, the soil types here do vary, but we do have a little bit more of those decomposed granite soils predominantly, and then a little bit of shale as well. In the winery we do a similar process when we make it. We try and make them as natural as possible, so this is bunch sorted, destemmed, berry sorted on a vibrating table, and then not crushed at all. Left into a tank to steep for about 3 days, a maceration to enable some form of natural fermentation. And then we don't add anything else. We avoid any acidity or enzymes or any finings or anything else. We don't filter this really at all. We do what we have to do, a sort of bottling filtration, very coarse, like a sort of socks, or using a pair of socks, unwashed socks, washed socks. Sorry. Anyway, this one is. So if we look at it, we can see it's got a medium colour. It's not a full-bodied wine. And importantly, maybe I should elaborate, forgetting that, the Clonal Selection Syrah is made from, in a climate of Elgin, being a cool climate, is different. You will find, when you look at Syrah being grown around the country, we find our sort of more Shirazi styles, which we see in Stellenbosch. They're quite big and buxom, powerful wines. We have a more sort of stem-included wines from a warm climate such as Swaland, which that stem is ameliorating some of that to give a bit more sappiness and juiciness to the wines. And importantly, in Elgin, it's actually a region which doesn't necessarily support Syrah, preferring perhaps the more earlier ripeners such as Chardonnay and Pinot. But if you have the more warmer slopes, north-facing, and you can get it in time, Syrah will ripen, but it will always be that more gentle style. It will be a style that will be towards your 13% alcohol rather than your 14.5%. And it tends to have that very elegant, delicate style. It was originally described by one famous commentator as a Pinot style of Syrah. And I think it retains that. It still has the inherent hallmarks of that pepper, more white pepper perhaps than black pepper. That's a little bit of red plum and red cherry, but it's also got a little bit of that Pinot's aromatic intensity, which I find fascinating. Equally though, what is important, it retains that lovely natural acidity, and it still has, whilst the tannins aren't necessarily massive or dense, they still have a fine blade or backbone of tannin that will enable, along with its acidity, to last for a long period of time. And in fact, although when we started we weren't sure, these wines have certainly proved themselves to be wines that can last several years, given the fact we've actually been still tasting. I've tasted recently the 12, so these are wines that will go on and on. And I'm thinking, for me, the 15 in this particular vintage, the 17, are wines of the decade, in the sense that they have a bit more seamlessness to the tannin, so they will actually arguably go on even longer because their natural acidity is so much more accentuated. Perhaps in its early youth, though, they are still quite tight and a little bit tricky to really get underneath.